Okay, so this video is definitely intended for beginners. I'm going to talk about creating the human head out of a sphere, just a way to keep the head anatomically correct. Now, keep in mind, you might use this method once or twice, and then after that, you probably won't need it anymore. But I'm going to take a sphere right here, drag it out, hit Edit. Go over here, hit Make Polymesh 3D, over here to my matte caps, and pick something like matte cap gray. I like this a little bit better than that red clay. Notice I'm still in low poly. I'm going to turn on my gizmo by pressing W, and now I can just sort of orient. If I were to turn on my floor right here, that will tell me where the bottom is, and if I look under here, I can see I have this blue axis, that's the Z axis, and the red axis is my X. I want that Z kind of coming out at me, and that's represented right here in my gizmo. So this tells me I'm facing the front, that everything is oriented up and down. And if I wanted to, I could press X on my keyboard and turn on my X symmetry so you can see that working. Now, I could turn on my perspective up here, and in most cases, at some point, I will turn that on. But right now, it's actually in my interest to remain in an orthogonal view. Alright, so I'm going to rotate this to the side. I don't really need that floor anymore, so I'm going to turn that off. Alright, so the goal here is to have an anatomically correct, correctly proportioned head. And look, I get most of my information from various sources. One really old but good source is Andrew Loomis. He's an old illustrator that has a number of books out on anatomy. It's mostly for drawing, but everything can be converted to work for 3D. Alright, so I'm at the side view right now. I can tell that because my Z-axis is pointing to the left. I'm going to hold Control, and that opens up my mask menu over here. Click on that, and I'm going to pick Mask Rectangle. If I hold Control, I can draw out this mask. And what I really want to do is I want to mask off one quadrant of that sphere, just like that. And then if I hold Control and tap out here in the canvas somewhere, I can reverse that mask. Alright, and then I'm going to go back to my gizmo, and I'm going to hold Alt, which opens up this padlock. And when this padlock is opened, then I can move my gizmo around freely without it moving the geometry that it's attached to. And what I want to do is I want to put it right about here and create a hinge where I'm going to rotate this out about like that. Alright, now if I hold Control and just drag out here, I get rid of that mask. And here's what I have so far. Now what I've done here is an important thing for me when it comes to getting my anatomy correct or my proportions correct. Everything is based on something else. And I need to get certain measurements based off of this sphere. And the way I can do that is when I roll out that quadrant, this establishes pretty much a point of reference that I can build everything else on. So this line now is my eyebrow line. And once I've established that, then I can begin establishing several other things off of that. What I also have is right here is my bisection line. So I've bisected that sphere vertically or horizontally rather. Actually both. So this line will tell me soon where my ear is placed and where my jaw will go also. So I am going to press B on my keyboard, press M, and then I will get this move brush, which is a B right there. So if I press BMB, I get this move brush. I have my X symmetry on. I'm going to hold my space bar and open this brush up pretty big, and then I'm going to pull this down just a little bit, and I'm holding shift to smooth that out. And so what I'm doing now is just establishing a jaw. Now you see how that gets extremely messy right there. And if I were to go over here, you see I have this poly F button. This poly F is my wireframe, and you can see that I have completely damaged that wireframe, and that's going to be pretty difficult to sculpt on pretty soon. So what I can do if I want is reset this cage simply by going to my geometry menu right here. Going down, I have Dynamesh, and so if I click on this Dynamesh, you can see that I have completely reset that cage. Now let's talk about Dynamesh for just a minute. So this Dynamesh does a couple of things for me. Actually, it does several things, but the first thing we're going to really focus on is how it will reset my cage. So if I were to take this and let's just say I stretch this way out, you can see that I've damaged this wireframe right here, and that sort of makes it a little more difficult to sculpt on. But if I've already used this Dynamesh button once, you notice that it stays on, and you actually have to remember to turn that off because it will sometimes interfere with other functions that ZBrush does, and it will certainly has the likelihood to crash ZBrush if you're not careful. But with this on, if I stretch something out like that and I need to reset my cage, I can hold Control and just drag a mask out here. And when I do that, it activates that Dynamesh, and that Dynamesh resets my cage. So I use Dynamesh early on in the concepting phase because it helps me reset this cage, and I can keep sculpting. What you might also notice is that up here at the top, I have this. This is my history bars, I guess you might call it. So if I use Control Z, I can undo something. If I use Control Shift Z, I can redo it. But maybe I make a move, I realize I did something wrong like 50 moves ago. And so I don't really want to hit Control Z 50 times to get back to where I started. And if that's the case, then I can go up here and just grab this history bar, and I can just move this wherever I need to. And once I get back to where I want to be, then I can just make the next move. And when I do, it will start establishing a new history. So these guys to the right up here will go away. Alright, so I've pulled my jaw down a little bit. You can see where I'm going here with this nose. I have established my eyebrow line right here, and I've bisected my head and gotten my jaw right there. Alright, I think I'll do a couple of things. So for starters, the height of your head and the width have a relationship. So on average, the width of a human head is about 2/3 the height. So anywhere from like 0.66 to 0.75, depending on what book you're reading, will establish the width. And so a way that I can clean that up or square that off might be the way to say it. I'm going to hold Control Shift, and I'm going to go up here to this. So I open up a new opportunity of brushes right here. When I hold Control Shift and click on this, these are different brushes that I can get to. And these are basically my clip, my slice, and my trim brushes, and we'll talk about some of these. Right now though, I need the clip brush. So I'm going to click on it, and let's talk about this. So if I hold Control Shift, I am accessing this clip, and then if I drag this out, I can let go of my two buttons and hold the space bar and move this around. And so you might notice that this line, if I hold Shift, it'll snap like that in increments. If I hold space bar, I can move that around, and there's a shadow on one side of that line. So on the side where the shadow is, that tells me what side I'm going to clip. And if you look, You see that it clips that off. It really doesn't hurt my wireframe. But the clip, so I'm not really deleting anything with this clip. I'm actually squishing it. So if I drag this out, and I know that I'm squishing it because I could do this on the small side of that sphere and everything is nice and clean like that. But if I were to come over here and try to do it on the large side of my sphere, see, I get this pancaking right here. And so that's what tells me that I am squishing that and not really deleting it or trimming it or anything. On the flip side, if I hold Control Shift and I come up here and I actually take a trim curve. So this does the same thing, only there's two differences. One is it won't do it with symmetry on. It will still only do it on one side, and it gives me this kind of crazy looking wireframe right there. So the difference is with this trim is I can do that and I don't get the pancaking that I get with the clip brush, but I do get this crazy wireframe. And so the trick is just to know which one you need at the time. So for me, I know that I'm going to be trimming the small side of something, so I'm not worried about it pancaking, and I would like the symmetry to work on this, so I'm going to pick my clip brush and do this again. So I'm just going to kind of guess, do something like that. Alright, so I said that I need this to be, let's just say 2/3, the width needs to be 2/3 the height. Now, I can kind of eyeball this and get a good guess on it, but if for whatever reason I needed to be, 100% accurate, I can measure this using my transpose. So if I press W and I get this gizmo, and if I hold Alt and open up the padlock and then click this little circular arrow thing right here, it's going to realign my axes. So I'm nice and straight right there. Now if I press Y, I get my transpose tool here. And so if you look right up here, you see that I have units. Alright, so this transpose tool can actually be a measurement. So if I start at the bottom and I hold, or at the top and I hold Shift and I go all the way down, and it'll kind of snap at the bottom of this, I can measure this. And notice that up here, so right now it's pretty randomly says 2.3967, and that number doesn't really help me if I'm trying to get a ratio of 0.6 of 1 or 0.66. So I can actually recalibrate this transpose tool. So if I go to Preferences, and then I'm going to go down to, I have transpose units right here. So the unit's already set to 1, but I have a calibration distance right here. So I need to type 1. I'm going to touch it and type 1, hit Tab. And so now you might notice that up here, I have recalibrated my units to 1 unit. And that can help me. So if I touch right here in the center and I drag this out, I'm holding Shift so it snaps on that line. And now if I look up at those units, if you look up here, watch this number moving. So what I want to get it to is 0.33, because I'm measuring from the center out, and so that would be half of 0.66 is 0.33. So if I pull it out, I can see that right about there is where I wanted this. So I cut this head just a little too short. So now if I grab this little red circle right here and hold Shift, you can see that the transpose tool stays where it is, but I can stretch this head. So I'm going to stretch that right out to that line. And so now that's at 0.33, a little bit more than that. Alright, so now if I press Y, I get back to my gizmo, and then if I press Q, I can get rid of the gizmo. So now I'm here with this, and I want to start cleaning this up and straightening things out. So I might first start with a move brush, BMB, and I'm just going to start reshaping, and I'm holding Shift and Smooth, and what I want is kind of a concave horseshoe shape. That's what our jawline is shaped like. So get something like that. what I could do here is I could push that in with my move brush, or what I might do is hit BH, and now I have an H polish brush. I might just kind of shave this off just a little bit like that. Alright. What I might also do, since I'm just looking at this head right here, if I look at it from this angle, so the back of a skull is wider than the front of a skull. We have this kind of temporal area right here. So I'm going to take that H polish and just kind of smooth that out a little bit like that. So you see this shape that I'm getting. That's a little closer to what we want to see. Now, I'll adjust this obviously a lot more as we go. I'm just getting rough shapes. Okay, so we have established this kind of zygomatic bone, which is your cheekbone right there. I said early on that this line right here establishes for us the eyebrow line. And so this gives us one point of reference to begin measuring out some things. All right, so if I go back to my transpose tool here, and here's where this comes in handy. So if I start at that eyebrow line and I draw a line down to the bottom of my chin, all right, so halfway between the eyebrow line and the chin line right here is the bottom of my nose. Alright, so that gives me a little line to be aware of. Alright, so that's going to be the bottom of my nose. And now if I take that same transpose tool and I go from here down to the bottom of my chin, halfway down is what we call the teeth line. So what that actually is the bottom of your bottom lip. It's where your gums meet your bottom set of teeth. So they call that the teeth line. And so the reason why that's even important is, so one thing to remember is the distance between your nose and your chin. The opening of your mouth is not exactly at the center. What's at the center is the bottom of your bottom lip. Now again, these are averages. Not everybody is shaped the same, but this is always a good place to start, right? Okay, so I'm going to hit BCB and I get this clay buildup brush, which is one of my favorite brushes. And so it makes marks kind of like this. I'm going to hold Alt and it will actually let me dig some clay out. So if this is my eyebrow line, then one thing I know is if I go back to my transpose tool and I start from top to bottom again, so halfway in that distance is going to be my eye sockets. My eyes should be halfway or close to it. So what I can do is kind of dig these sockets out. I'm digging around my nose a little bit, holding shift to sort of smooth this out, and I'm just really roughing this in. What you can also do if I wanted to establish that nose just a little better, I'm holding Control and I'm going to pick my mask pen. I might just mask that out right there, Control tap and reverse that, and then I can take my gizmo and just rotate that out some. Now notice I'm not getting stuck in any one place really. I'm trying to keep the entire model at the same level of completion. So what I'm not going to do is maybe, let's say, just sit here and work on the nose for an hour until it's perfect, and then go to the eyes and work on those until they're perfect. There's lots of reasons why I might want to work here a little bit, work here a little bit, work all the way around the entire model as I go. And everything stays at the same level of completion. So when the eyes are completely finished, well, then the nose and the mouth and everything else should end up completely finished roughly at the same time. It's a really good workflow. It's a good habit to get into, and there's lots of reasons why you might want to do that. All right, so I'm establishing that my eye sockets are right there. I want to look again from this angle, and I'm just looking at where my mouth is going to be. And so my mouth should curve out some. I'm getting this kind of curved shape right here. And what I also want to do is then take the back corners of my mouth, and I just want to pull that back some. And you can see that I'm already kind of establishing that crease that we have coming down from our nose right there. Now, obviously this is very rough at the moment, but we're just establishing these things. What I could also do is I'm going to take my damn standard, which is BDS. I'm going to draw this out just a little more. So the width of your mouth on average should line up roughly with the center of your eyes, your pupils right there. And we'll get to those eyes in just a minute. Now, since I've already started establishing this shape right here, I think I'll go ahead and give myself a little more right there. Smooth it out. Now, I'm going to hold Control and go back to my mask menu, and I'm going to take Mask Lasso. And so right now, what I want to do here is I'm going to mask something about like that, and then reverse my mask, go back to my gizmo, and like I said, if I hold Alt and open that padlock, I can click this right here, and it's going to realign my axes, and then bring this down here, and I just want to pull this in just a little bit. Hold Shift, smooth this out. Alright, so here's where we are. Alright, so maybe I'll just establish my neck here. I'm going to go back over here to my subtool menu and go to Insert. I'm going to insert a cylinder. Now you notice you have Insert and Append right here. So these things they both work the same way, but they are slightly different. So if I appended something, like let's just go in and I'm going to append this ring. If I append that, I click on it, it's going to show up at the bottom of my stack, but I will still be selecting the subtool that I already had selected before I did that. Now, if I insert, if I go to Insert and I say, okay, let me get this helix. If I click that, Insert is going to place this helix right below the subtool that I already had selected, and I will then be selected on that helix. So I tend to use Insert more than anything, mostly for that one little thing, which is when I insert something, I am already selected on that subtool when I do it, and it just saves you a fraction of a second, but I kind of like that fraction of a second. So, alright, so this is going to be our neck. I'm going to use this gizmo. I'll grab this little orange rectangle right there, and I will scale this down. And so one of the reasons I wanted to be in an orthographical view is I can grab these arrows right here and just move this around. If I were in perspective, it might not stay completely perpendicular, and in the center it could kind of drift off in a weird direction depending on where my camera is facing. Alright, but for now, so I'm going to rotate this maybe 10 degrees. Maybe 15. I'm going to place that right there. So I'm just punching in a neck real quick. I will end up combining all these pieces together at some point. All right, so let's talk about the eyes. So to have anatomically correct eyes, to know the size of those spheres that we're trying to get here, we can fit 5 spheres across the width of our head. And so that's the way that I just established real quickly that my eyes are going to be the right size. And so the way I do that is I go over here to my subtool menu, I'm going to click Insert, and I'm going to bring in a sphere. Now, what I also do right off the bat is I like for the pole of this sphere to be facing me. It just makes modeling the iris and other things here a little bit simpler, I think. So I just go ahead and establish that. And the way I did was I have my gizmo. If I don't have any symmetry on this original sphere, I can hold Alt, click this arrow right here to realign my axes, and then this little marker right here, if I hold Alt and click it, it puts my gizmo in the center. Like if I click that, I know that I'm going to be dead center, and then I'm going to hold Shift and grab that rotate, and when I do that, you can see right below the sphere right there, it's counting in 5-degree increments how far I'm turning that. And so I want to turn that sphere 90 degrees, and there you go. Alright, now what I want to do is I need to set up 5 spheres. And the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to hold Control and grab this axis, and I can duplicate this sphere out like this. As long as the original sphere doesn't have any subdivisions, then we're in a good place. Alright, and notice that when I do that, it leaves the original sphere masked. So these guys are both, if you see up here, these guys are both in the same subtool. And so if it didn't have that mask and I moved anything, it would move both of them. But since I have that mask, I can move this guy independent of this one. But all I want to do is pull this out to where they're very close but not quite touching. And then I'm going to do it one more time. So now I have these 3 guys here. Alright, and now I need the other side. So the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to go up here to my Z plugins. I will go to my subtool master right here, and then I have mirror right there. So I click on mirror and I get this menu box. And so what this is asking me down here is what axis do I want to mirror on? And I want to mirror on the X axis. And then up here it's asking, well, do I want the new thing that I'm creating to be in a separate subtool or in the same subtool with the other spheres? I want it in the same subtool. So I'm going to click that and hit OK. And now I have this. So I mirrored these over. So right here you can see there's 2 spheres actually. They're sitting one on top of the other, which is fine. So I bring back my gizmo by pressing W. I want to hold Alt and I want to make sure I realign my axes. I also need to put this in the center because I need to scale these guys down. And notice they're going to scale to wherever my gizmo is. So I'm going to hold Alt, click this right here and put my gizmo in the center. So then I can scale this down like this. And I just want to get these guys roughly the width of my head. Now, so if I get these guys the width of my head, I know they look pretty small, but that's actually the size that your eyes are. Now, I did these 5 actually /6 spheres right here just to establish the size. Once I have established that I have an anatomically proportionally correct eye, then I can get rid of the ones I don't need. And here's the way that I generally do that. I can get rid of my gizmo for the moment. I'm going to press Q. And what I want to use is poly. You can see that right now I have 2 separate poly groups. It would help me if these were all individually separate poly groups. So I'm going to go over here to my menu, go down to poly groups, and then right up here at the top there's auto groups. So if I click on that, everything becomes its own color. And the way this helps me, a couple of things. If I have my gizmo and I hold Control and tap any one of these poly groups, it's going to mask out all the other poly groups. Alright, so that's one way. And actually I could do that. I could Control, tap out here and reverse that. But that's not what I'm doing. What I want to do is actually hide and then delete the ones I don't need. So all I want is this one and this one. So with my gizmo off, I'm going to hold Control Shift and I click on that and it hides all the other ones. Then I click on it again and it does the opposite. So now I can go through and click these. Alright, so all of those, they're not deleted, they're just hidden. But those are the ones I don't need. And so now that they're hidden, I can go over here to Geometry, go down to modify topology, and then right here there is delete hidden. Alright, so I'm going to click on that, and now all of those extra spheres are actually gone. I have these guys are the right size, and so I'm going to pull them in. Alright, now if you want to establish how deep your spheres should be in the head, generally the front tangent, so right there, should line up roughly with the back corner of the mouth from the side view. And so that right there, that's about where we want our eyes. We also want to make sure that they line up halfway the distance of my head, which they pretty much do. So we measure with our transpose tool, and now we're in business. So now we know that our eyes are the right size. They are placed in the head this way, the right way that they ought to be. They're as deep as they ought to be. They are aligned vertically where they ought to be. And so now we have our eyes in the right place. Okay, so now that we have our eyes, let's talk about our eyelids. And I want to talk about just an easy method that I use to establish eyelids. Works for me. I'm going to take these eyes and I'm going to duplicate them. So I'll go down here in my subtool menu, have the duplicate button right here. So I click that, and now I have this other set of eyes. And in fact, if I hold shift and I click on this eye symbol of the subtool I have selected, I can turn all the other ones off, and then and what I really need is just one of these. Alright, so I've got this right here, and we talked about the clip curve, we talked about the trim curve. Now let's talk about the slice curve. So I'm going to turn this sideways. I'm going to hold Control Shift, and up here where I would access the clip curve, there is also the slice curve right here. So pick that slice curve. If I hold Control Shift, this draws out just like the clip and the trim curve. The difference here is I'm going to put that right in the center. I'm holding Shift so that this snaps on a horizontal line. I'm holding spacebar so I can move this up and down, and I put that right in the center, and I just let go of everything. And when I let go, you see that this slices it in order to give me polygroups, but nothing physical has happened to this sphere. It's just divided it into polygroups, but it hasn't actually sliced anything. But here's how this can help me. So I told you earlier that there were a number of ways we could use Dynamesh. And so another way that we can use it, besides resetting this wireframe, is I can go to Geometry. I'm going to go down to Dynamesh, and I'm going to turn on this Groups button right here. So if I turn on Groups, it's going to, when I use Dynamesh, it will split this up into two airtight pieces based on those two polygroups. So I turn on Groups, I'll turn that resolution up just a little bit, hit Dynamesh, and so notice if I take my gizmo and I lift this up, so you can see these are both airtight pieces, and that was done with that Groups button. So I'm done with Dynamesh now. I can turn that off. And I also told you before how these polygroups, that if I have my gizmo here, I can hold Control and I can tap one of these polygroups and it masks out the other polygroup, which is just what I want. So actually, before we even get to that, so I'm going to turn on my other spheres that are underneath my two eyes. And over here, I'm going to turn on transparency. And I have transparency and I have ghost, so that's transparent without, that's transparent with ghost. So ghosting just kind of makes it where you can see it a little better. And I'm going to scale this up a little bigger than my eye. So I can decide here how thick I actually want my eyelids to be. And I generally go just a little bit thicker than what would be realistic. But that way I have a little extra space here to sculpt on it or smooth or trim it down or anything in the future. Okay, so you can see here that it's a little thicker than my eye. I can now turn off that transparency. I'm going to hold Control with my gizmo on and mask out that bottom lid. I hold Alt with my padlock open right here, realign my axes, and then I'm going to bring this axis right to the center of that, and then rotate this like that. And actually, depending on how realistic I wanted my character to be, the outside eyelid on everybody tends to overlap the bottom eyelid. So I could pull that and overlap it kind of like that. Some people on the inside, some people not on the inside. It kind of depends. So if I, was trying to be realistic here, what I also could do is actually just pull both of these out just a little bit. Pull that out just a little bit. Okay, so I might just decide that I wanted something kind of like that. Now I can go back to my gizmo, hold Control, and now I'm masking out the top one. Hold Alt and realign that. Put this back in the center. Rotate this down just a little bit. Okay, so now I have eyelids. Now I need to duplicate this and put it over here on this side. Now I could totally use my mirror and weld that I use, or I'm sorry, my mirror that I used under the Z plugins here earlier. But here's the thing. If I go down here and I hit mirror and I have all that already set right, see how it changes my polygroups? And I like using my polygroups as an organizational tool. And so this just doesn't work for me. But if I go back to here and do something different, if this time I go to geometry, I'm going to go down to modify topology, and I have mirror and weld. So I have these little axes right here. You can see those, and I'm going to be mirroring on the X axis, so by default it's set to X. I don't really have to do anything. I'm going to click mirror and weld, and notice it mirrors for me, but it maintains those polygroups that I had. So now my bottom eyelid is one color, my top eyelid is another color, and if I ever need to mask out one or the other, I have these pretty well organized the way I want them to be organized. Alright, so there we go. I have my eyelids, and now I can bring back my head. So I might take my clay buildup. I'm going to hold Alt, go back to my head. I'm going to dig this out just a little bit. Now notice an advantage here. So by having these eyelids separate for the moment, I can work on this area here, my eyebrow. Right here is my procerus, my eyebrow. This is my lacrimal gland right here. So I can sculpt on all these areas, and I'm not affecting my eyelids. My eyelids, I have these nice crisp edges right here. Everything is nice and clean, and I don't really want to mess that up yet. And so as long as I keep them separate, I can sculpt on the rest of this head for as long as I want to, and I'm not really upsetting any of that, which is a pretty good thing for the moment. All right, let's talk about, we've got our neck. Let's talk about ears. So the front of the ear is going to be right on that bisection line that we originally established. An ear is going to be, the top of the ear is roughly going to be where the eyelid and the brow meet right here. Some people say the eyebrows, some people actually say the eye. Right around here is a good area. Now, usually the bottom of the ear lines up with the bottom of the nose, and it's kind of a leaning D, kind of like that, except I need it a little further back. So about like that. If I were to mask this out and just reverse that mask, I could actually take my gizmo, I could rotate that out, and I could start sculpting right here. Now, see how messy that gets. When I'm building something for the first time, I just like separate pieces. It keeps everything nice and clean for me. And so one way I approach this, instead of masking and pulling that out and all of that, I just take a separate piece. I come in, I insert me another cylinder. I can scale this cylinder down like this, rotate it like that. Alright, Alright, so that's roughly the size I want. I'm going to see I'm roughly the bottom of the nose. I suppose I could take that a little bit more. Alright, so now I could squish that ear a little bit like that. Squish it a little bit like that. Alright, so that's roughly what I'm looking for out of my ear. Now, I've got it roughly where I want it. There's also this area behind the ear that I like to establish real easily like this. I'm just going to insert another sphere. So when I get this the size that I want it, which might be something kind of like that, I'm going to take my H polish, just flatten that out. Alright, so that's the shape I'm looking for right there. Now I can take my ear and that back sphere, and I'm going to merge these guys together. I want them into one subtool. So if I take the one that's on top, here is my cylinder, here is the sphere. If I take the cylinder and I go down here, there's this right here, which is merge down. So I'm just going to click merge down. I'm going to tell it OK. And now I have both of those pieces in one subtool, which is exactly what I want. And so now I can go back up here to my Z plugins, go to mirror. I want it in the same subtool on the X axis. All right, so now I have ears. Now what I like about this whole method is, first of all, I have pretty clean geometry right here. Second of all, I can move this around and adjust it as I see fit. Without having to really mess with any other geometry. Same thing with the eyelids. So by having all these pieces separate, the way it helps me is I can make all these kind of fine-tuned adjustments here without having to constantly clean up other clay that I may or may not have messed up as I'm working on this. Put this cube down here to just give me a little something for the torso to work on a bust at some point. But you don't need this. It doesn't really matter. I just thought I would throw it there. So we have everything here built proportionally now. So everything is built into the right place. Now's the time we start sculpting. So what I want to do is start combining these pieces and actually show you another function of Dynamesh. So now my actual eyes, I don't want to include this because if this character would ever get rigged in an animation or a game or something, obviously your eyes are going to be separate and they would be rigged so they could rotate and move around. So they don't get included in this mesh. And actually for the time being, I like to keep eyelids separate for a while. At some point I will include them, but here's what I do. So if I select this subtool right here, I have these arrows down here, I can click this and I can bump this up to the top, or I'm going to grab these eyelids. I could hold shift and click this arrow and it will automatically move it all the way to the very top of my stack. So now I have the head, the ears, the shoulders, and the neck, and I want to combine all these into one subtool. So I grab the one that's at the top and I'm going to go down here to merge down. So I'll just click this 2-3 times until I have now merged everything except for the eyelids and the eyes into one subtool. Now, just because these guys are in one subtool, that doesn't mean that they aren't. They are all still separate pieces. And if I wanted to separate them, I could separate them based on their polygroups. I could go down here to split, hit group split, and that would separate these guys again into separate subtools based on their polygroup. So actually this cube down here would split into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, would split into 6 different groups because each side is a different polygroup, and we don't want that. But anyway, so now I have these guys in one subtool, and I want to literally fuse them into one mesh. And the way I would do that is I'll go to geometry over here, and I'll go back to my Dynamesh again, which is still on, by the way. I should have turned that off. So we know that Dynamesh will reset our wireframe for us if we have deformed it or stretched it out so far that it's that you can't really sculpt on it very well. We also knew that if we press this groups button, it will split up anything that's a poly group into a separate airtight mesh. If I leave groups off and just activate Dynamesh, the other thing that it will also do is it will take all of these separate pieces and it will fuse them into one piece. So I'm just going to hold Control and drag out my mask, and notice that now all of these pieces that were separate are now fused into one piece, and that's what I want. And what I could also do is I like to clean up these poly groups because I don't want anything accidental happening. I'm going to turn off Dynamesh. I'm going to go down to my poly groups and hit Group Visible. So now everything is one poly group. So now I have everything except for the eyelids and the eyes fused together, and I have built something that is anatomically proportionate and correct. Now is when I actually start sculpting. Okay, so now we have something that is proportionally accurate, and it's time to start sculpting. So I have my symmetry on, and generally what I do first is I like to go in and start laying the groundwork for certain landmarks. What I might do is come in here, I'm going to hit BCB. To get to my clay buildup, I'll hold Alt so I can dig right here, and I'm just going to kind of hollow this out a little bit to get to just to shape this out some. Alright, and I'm just roughing things in. I'll hit BMB to get to my move brush. And so I'm just going to start shaping this out just a little bit, and I'll come back to it later. Notice I've said this before that I like to go around the entire model and keep everything kind of at the same level of completion. And so I get a basic shape here, and then I'll come and start adding some basic shapes in other places. Once I have established all of my basic shapes, then I will slowly start refining it more and more. And so like right here, I'm still using my clay buildup. I hold Alt. I can dig this out. Now your nose is shaped, it has kind of a like a double hourglass shape. So if I were to draw this, it's going to go in, and out. So that's kind of the shape that every nose takes. And so, and some, you know, to more degree than others, but I would just push that in, pull this out, push this in, and then pull this out. Some people's nostrils go out a little bit more than others. Anywhere between the inside corner of the eye and about a quarter of the way in the eye, anywhere within that region, you're usually pretty good. All right, so I just sort of sculpt out the nose a little bit there. I'm taking the same clay buildup. I'm going to rough in my top lip. I'm going to create, they call this the Cupid's bow. So it's something like that. The bottom lip, I'm going to shape it kind of like that. Now the top lip, just like the outer corners of your eyelids, overlaps the bottom. And then you have the philtrum right there. Now your upper lip takes kind of a flatness, not on everybody, but most people. There's a kind of flatness to it right there, and then your bottom lip is more round. So something like that. And what I also could do is, maybe pull this out. I'm smoothing everything. I'm holding shift. Now, if I were to take my H polish and try to polish out these corners, it can totally be done, but sometimes you can get on the wrong side of that and it's really hard to flatten that out. But if I hit BTD, Trim Dynamic, works really well for just shaving off those rigid corners that maybe we don't want. Now, I'll take my clay buildup again and just start sketching out certain muscle groups. So, see, sternocleidomastoid, and what I generally do, it goes down and it actually attaches to your sternum down here, but it's not really what it appears. It appears that it connects to your clavicle right here, your collarbone. So what I generally do is I sculpt in a little bit right here and I just do kind of a check mark. I kind of check it out to there. Might pull my shoulders out just a little bit more. Now, your collarbone is shaped kind of like a handlebar on an old school, like 1950s bike. So I just check that in. And back here, you're going to have your scapula. The scapula comes up and it squares off right there. The trapezius comes down in the center of that square. It comes down like this and it attaches. It also rolls just around to a little bit of the front right there. Okay, so and notice I'm just sketching stuff out, getting my basic muscular shape while not getting too lost in one particular place. Let's get back up here to the face. So I have the zygomatic bone right here, and this zygomatic, it goes back to your ear about right there. So I just established this. You have different jaw muscles. And what I might do is just give myself a little bit more chin. Somewhere along the way we lost our chin. And so the trick is, if you ever get lost while you're sculpting, sometimes you know that something is looking pretty good, but you just know it's off, like something's not quite there. And if that's ever happening to you, then your anatomy is what you come back to. So if I have a pretty good understanding of, and you don't have to know every muscle, but if you have a pretty good understanding of just the muscles that you tend to see, the outside muscles, and if I can start to put those in place, then I can get my anatomy pretty squared away here. Okay, so we got 13,000. If you look up here, you can see that. So active points right here. Alright, so why did I even bother doing that? I mentioned earlier about the Dynamesh wireframe. If you look at this ZRemesher wireframe, it just looks a little closer to what you might see in a production. Now there are some flaws with this wireframe. For example, you would never use this for production. It has a spiral algorithm which makes rigging not optimal. But I have this nice wireframe here and a good low poly to begin working on. And so now I will subdivide this. So Control D gives me one subdivision right here. I'll Control D again, get another one, Control D. Okay, so what I did was just subdivide this. I am now up to just under 1 million polys. I'm pretty high res. I also have these subdivisions levels right here. Okay, so this is the type of workflow that I really prefer. So maybe I'm over here doing something to the ear, I'm holding shift and I'm trying to smooth this, but I really want for something more to happen than that. Turn this up to 100. So because I'm so high poly, I don't get a lot of reaction from the clay here when I'm trying to smooth it. But if I were to hit Shift D and bump this down to low poly, you see how fast I can affect the shape of that. And so that might be a reason why I would need to be able to bump down to low poly sometimes and then press D as in dog and bump back up to high poly to work on something. I just want the option of dealing with both of these, and I consider this to be a better workflow than just remaining in Dynamesh the entire time. Okay, so now what I probably want to do is I'm ready to start adding some more details. So really I'm just using only a few brushes. I mostly sculpt with a clay buildup, a Damien Standard, my smooth, and a move brush. I mean, and an H polish. I mean, that's basically it most of the time. So I kind of want to adjust these eyelids right here, and this is just another reason of why I want to maybe have them detached, so I can adjust this, get things the way I want without affecting the rest of my clay, which is really good. I can come back over here and switch back to I'm now on my head. I have a clay buildup. I'm going to hold Alt and I can just dig around a little bit here and then let go of Alt and I can actually add clay. And so I go back and forth between adding clay and smoothing clay. So this is kind of part of my process. And so at this point I have all my proportions in order, and I am really just working on the detail now. So I'm using my Damn Standard brush at a 13 intensity just to sort of sketch in, just to begin to sketch in the kind of detail that I'm looking for. Go back to my clay buildup. I'm using the Alt right now to subtract some and then to smooth it. Using a move brush. And so notice how I am just going around the entire head, working my way around to everywhere, adding whatever detail is needed or whatever clay. H polish right here. clay buildup can help me get just that little kind of texture on my lips. Although I'm still pretty low poly at the moment. I'm going to try my /3 brush. It comes in, I've got it set to Z add and 15 intensity just like before. I'm going to bump this up to a higher subdivision level and see how I can kind of outline those lips. It gives me some definition. Alright, so this little area right here in the ear tends on most people to kind of stick out. From this angle it'll stick out beyond this outer rim right there. So I'm going to take my mask pen, mask that area out like that, reverse that mask. If I hold control and tap this mask, I can blur it, blur the fall off like that. And I think I'll just pull some of this outward. And then I could control tap and reverse that mask, maybe push that in. Right here is the dam standard, which helps me edge that out a little bit. Alright, so at this point I might be ready to go ahead and combine the eyelids. So what I would do is I'm going to move the body up here above the eyelids and then go to my merge and hit merge down. So these guys are now combined, and then I will go to my Dynamesh. So another thing that Dynamesh does is we talked about, well, so I've put these guys both in the same subtool. We talked about this before, but they're still separate meshes, and I need to fuse them together. So I'm going to go to my Dynamesh, Geometry, Dynamesh. I'm going to turn the resolution up pretty high. Maybe about 500, we'll just try that. And the higher I push that resolution, the more I'm going to maintain any level of detail that I've already sculpted here. Okay, so as you can see, all of this has now been fused together. But now I have that Dynamesh mesh again. And so the last stage that I might end up having to do, so I showed you how to remesh, that I like to use that Z-remesher wireframe. But what can also happen is if I Z-remesh all of this, because right now I'm at 4 million, which is really high poly, I have no subdivisions over here. which makes it kind of difficult to sculpt. I need to have a low poly version that I can get to smooth things and to generally deal with, and I need a high poly version as well. So if I'm going to do that, then I'm going to have to remesh this. And when I remesh this and I have a low poly version of it, I'm going to lose all this nice level of detail that I have and these nice crisp edges and all of that, and I really don't want to lose that. So there's a way that there's a tool that I can use to help me maintain all of that. Before I even get there though, I think one thing I'd like to do first is I want to trim this bust down. So I think I will I'll go in here and use my slice curve the same way we did before. So I'm going to go down to my poly groups, do a group visible so everything is one poly group, and then when I slice it using the slice curve, it will break into 2 poly groups, and then I'm going to use that Dynamesh groups again. But I have these poly groups right here, so I can use those. I will go back over here to my Dynamesh, turn on groups. I've got a high resolution, so I will Dynamesh this, and it's going to split that bottom part off because I want to get rid of it now. And now I have this kind of airtight bust. I'm going to turn off my Dynamesh. I'm going to go to Geometry, Modify Topology, hit Delete Hidden. So that gets rid of those other pieces. Alright, so now the only thing I need, or the only thing left, since I just used my Dynamesh to do this, everything's in one piece now. The only thing I'm missing is I don't have any subdivisions right here, and I really would like to have that. It would make my workflow go a bit smoother. It's nice to have a low poly and a high poly, as I mentioned before. Right now all I have is a 2 million poly, and that's good in some respects, not good in other respects. So what I want to use is, or what I'm going to do, is I'm going to take this mesh and I'm going to duplicate it. Alright, so up here I'm going to rename this to Original. I'm going to name this New. Alright, so the new one, I want to remesh this just like we did earlier. So I'll have subdivisions. I need a low and a high poly, and I'll have my eyelids and everything included in this, and I'm going to use a tool called projection, because after I have a low poly, I'm going to lose whatever detail I might have right here, and I want to get that detail back, and I'm going to show you how to do that. So first things first, I'm going to go down here to my Z-Remesher. I'm going to stick with that 5000 and hit Z-Remesh. Okay, so what I have now is a low poly version of this head, and if we pretend that I had a lot of detail on that original, then I probably just lost it when I went to low poly. But here's what I can do. I'm going to turn everything off except for that original head, and I'm going to reproject from that head to this new head to get my details back. Now what I want to do is, the original one has 2 million polys, so on average you want the new one to get all of whatever detail you might have had on the original. You want it to be equal or higher in poly count, usually within reason. And so I could just subdivide this several times until I get up to 2 million polys and then hit the reproject button. But I might get what's called blowouts, which sometimes you get these verts that just blow out like that, and you have to get way out here to the end and hit smooth, and sometimes it can turn into a pretty big hassle and a pretty big cleanup. So a way to maybe minimize the likelihood of that happening is, instead of subdividing 3 or 4 times and hitting project, I'm going to go down to the project button, which is under the tool, the subtool menu, and while it's at low poly, I'm going to go ahead and project it one time, and then I'm going to hit Control D and subdivide and project, and subdivide again and project, and then subdivide one more time and project one more time. So basically what I did here was I projected every single time I subdivided. And what this does is it slowly trains that clay to take the shape that you're trying to get it to take. And so it just minimizes the likelihood that you would get these blowouts. And so what I've done now is I have taken this original, I duplicated it, I Z-remeshed it, and then I projected the details. And so now I have a high poly version of this that I can sculpt on, but I also have subdivisions right here. And so being able to go to a low poly and then back up to a high poly, so Shift D to go down and D to go back up. This gives me more flexibility and gives me more control with my workflow. And so from here on out, now it's just all about cleaning up my mesh and continuing to sculpt. Alright, so I could just keep sculpting on this all day. I think this kind of gets the point across. This is where you want to be. I'm going to turn perspective on, so now it actually looks a whole lot better. And from here on out you can sculpt all your details, and now you have a proportionally accurate head, and this is a good base mesh to start sculpting your character on. Hope this helps.